going to talk about how physical pain differs vastly from physical suffering, two totally distinct things, and how if physical pain and suffering beget mental anguish can beget additional physical suffering, sometimes pain, and each of these beget loss of enjoyment of life. So we're going to move into that in the second segment. Before we get going, though, in every one of these rooms, there is an unsung hero. In our room, it is Jose Munoz. Jose Munoz gets in here each morning at about 6 o'clock and works and is respectful and polite and hardworking and competent and skilled and bright, puts all of these things together. And when somebody like me comes walking in and I say, Jose, can you help me out, please, and make sure we get all this hooked out? He was so comforting in the way that he said, don't worry, I can handle everything. So I think a great round of applause, Jose Munoz. All right, thank you, Jose. I took my first deposition in May of 1974. I took my most recent deposition Monday. I'm taking my next deposition, although I'll be in Los Angeles. It's a deposition of a defense medical examiner, an orthopedic physician for the defense Monday, and it's a remote depot. I was sworn in on May 10th of 1974, 11 o'clock in the morning, Federal Courthouse, West Palm Beach. Nancy and I had 2 kids at that time, and they were like this high. And she was holding Todd, who's now a lawyer, in our office, and Eric was standing next to her. That morning, I can tell you that when I woke up, I was, in my mind, the single most fired up, excited, enthusiastic, on fire lawyer in America. I couldn't wait to practice law. When I got back to the office that afternoon, a senior partner in that firm said, I need you to try a case Monday. I've got to be in another trial up in Fort Pierce, Florida. So I flew solo, and by Tuesday afternoon had my first verdict. By Friday afternoon, my second, because I sat second seat with another partner in a 3-day product liability case, which today would probably take 3 weeks to try. So fast forward to now, some 47 or 48 years later, and if I put my hand on a Bible or you hook me up to a lie detector machine, I would pass it with the following. I am more excited, more fired up, more enthusiastic now than ever before. I love practicing law. I love taking depositions. I love the hearings. I love the trials. I love most of the clients, okay? There are some that give us a little heartburn from time to time, but I suspect we give them a little heartburn in return. And I will just tell you, I have felt this way since day one. I will never, ever retire. I hope I live to be 150, and if so, I want to practice law forever. So it is that enthusiasm that to me becomes such an important part of what we are doing in our practices. So we're going to go right into cross-examination of defense medical examiners. We're going to also cover, I'm going to take you back on a little journey into some of the basics of cross. Because only, I'm going to say it was about, it was just before the pandemic started. I was at a hearing. I walked into a courtroom. They told me a trial was starting. And I knew one of the lawyers was from another area in Florida. And I knew he was just really a seasoned veteran. And I walk in, and he was delivering his opening statement. The judge says, you ready for your opening? He says, yes. He gets up and he says, ladies and gentlemen, my name is so-and-so. I'm going to give an opening statement. The purpose of an opening statement is the following. And then he says, what I'm about to tell you is not evidence. I go, how does a seasoned veteran do that? How would a seasoned veteran get up and not go directly into the story of the case? The reason is complacency, forgetfulness, and somehow getting to a point where instead of doing it the way we need to do it, that particular lawyer has, in my view, lost his way a little bit, because that's not how you deliver an opening statement if you want it to be one of impact. Many of you have done work in the criminal justice system. We call character witnesses all the time. Someone to say, are you aware of so-and-so's character for truth and veracity, or that person's reputation? Yes. Or are you aware of that person's reputation within the community within which he resides for being a peaceful and law-abiding citizen? Yes. What is your opinion? He's not peaceful at all. He beats everybody up, and that supposedly is going to hurt that person. That's what a defense medical examiner is. And you use your own language. In every state, it's a little bit different. Some people call them CMEs, and whatever it is you're going to call them. I just call them defense medical examiners. They are there for one thing: a credibility boost for one side, a credibility diminisher for the other side. They're not there to heal. They're not there to, in most instances, to talk medicine. When you put your case on, your goal is to drive home with the judge and jury that your client is credible and believable and real, that your case is genuine and authentic. Remember this phrase: authenticity is the first cousin of credibility. My last trial was in August of this year, several weeks ago. In rebuttal summation, at least one of the points I made was, our evidence and our clients are real, theirs is not. And then I said, authenticity is the first cousin of credibility. That which is real, that which is genuine, is credible. Professor Irving Younger, this goes back to the 60s. The 10 Commandments of Cross-Examination. You know these. If you shoot me an email, I'll send you this keynote presentation. You don't need to take all these down. I'm going to go through some of them in a minute. You remember these things. This is a great set of guidelines. It never should have been called the 10 Commandments. Alvin knows this. Commandments are not meant to be broken. It should be guidelines, because it is a good set of guidelines, especially for newer and younger lawyers. So you look at these defense medical exams, why are they happening? Credibility, credibility, credibility. You look at everyone you get coming up in every case, and the exception might be this. You have a great liability case, they're going to admit liability. A horrible injury. The plaintiff is a quadriplegic, a good person. She's from a wonderful family. She is a wonderful person. Everything about the case is extraordinary. You wonder, well, why are we actually going to trial? Well, there's going to be a trial. And they want your client examined by their physiatrist life care planner. That might be the one instance where they're not there to quarrel with the medicine or the anatomy or whether or not somebody's hurt and all that. It's about credibility. Think about credibility. Think when you take the deposition of the defense medical examiner, how often credibility statements are made. You may ask, have you made any judgment calls during your assessment of this case as to the credibility of anyone? Of course not. I'm a scientist. And then as you go further with questioning, you say, well, wait a minute, you just made that conclusion. Where's the science or the medicine on that? Well, that's how I think. That's how you think because you're making credibility judgments. Undermining the legitimacy of plaintiff's case. And the key, creating suspicion. It's to throw out suspicion and make the jurors think, maybe the plaintiff not so credible, not so believable on that. So on these commandments, some of these apply to trial, some to deposition, some to both. But I want to hit a few items before we go into specific DMEs. You remember the movie Karate Kid? Karate Kid's talking to Mr. Miyagi. He goes over, says, I'm going to start the training today. And what does he do? He gives him two rags to start cleaning. And he says, wax on, wax off. And the next thing you know, he's there, and for a few days, there's no training on fighting. It's all cleaning the walls, cleaning the windows. Wax on, wax off. I like the Karate Kid method of cross-examination. Get in, get out. Not in a deposition. A deposition, you got to be thorough, cover everything. At trial, do you really think the jury is impressed with a 4-hour cross-examination where all you're trying to prove is that you're the smartest person in the courtroom because you know as much medicine as the doctor on that particular point? They're not impressed by that. They're not. They're impressed by points. Are you making points? Are you moving the ball forward for your client? So I want to get in, I want to get out, and I want to build sound bites for later on in the trial, perhaps with other witnesses, and certainly for summation. Short questions, plain words. Yes. Oh my God. All you got to do is take a look at some of your own transcripts, and I can do it myself, and you look at the wording of some of the questions, and you would go, how did I ever ask that question? Because if you're later going to impeach somebody, and your question is a 2-paragraph question, the judge is going to say, wait a minute, you get 4 questions in there, I'm not going to let you do that. So I want it to be a crisp question. If I'm taking the 30B6 depot of a product manufacturer, and I say, remember, 30B6, they speak as the voice of the corporation. The question is not going to be some 1-minute question and do you agree with that or not? It's going to be something crispy, shorter, quick. Does ABC Motor Company take the position that the speed of the plaintiff vehicle exceeded 46 miles per hour? That's the question. Okay? Not, so I want to move on to something else. Let's talk a little bit about speed. I understand that your company does this, that, and the other. So when it comes to speed, do you all have a position that you're thinking of that you're going to throw out in front of the jury that it was more than 46 or less than 46 or what? People ask those kind of questions, and they're horrible. Make them crisp and clear. Avoid hypercorrect speech. The juror psychologists and juror sociologists will tell us that the more hypercorrect your speech is, the less credible you are. Which is why in jury selection, if you're hesitant and searching for just the perfect word or phrase, and you're looking, well, my next question deals with, no, you converse with the jurors. And I had a judge once say to me, it's as if you go into a park, sit on a park bench, and you're having a conversation with the person next to you. You ever heard of pain and suffering? Uh-huh. How do you feel about pain and suffering? That's what you would do if it was a stranger. So that's the way you talk. Avoid hypercorrect speech. Leading questions, generally yes. The newer and younger you are and less experience, stay more with leading questions. But when you have a witness and you know you got the witness and you know there's no explanation, you might say to a physician in a deposition, maybe even a trial, why would you do such a thing? You've got to be thinking, what are the possible answers? In 1997, I tried a case on Court TV, the old Court TV. It was part of Project MKUltra. In the 50s, the CIA and the Army gave LSD to 750 soldiers without them knowing about it. And it caused horrific problems for so many of them. If you want the full gist of the case, look up United States of America versus James Stanley. We went all the way to the Supreme Court. We lost in a 5-4 decision written by Justice Scalia. We didn't stop. We went to seek a private claims bill in the U.S. Congress and Senate. It was granted, and then we had a trial. During the trial, we were not permitted, or in the lead up to the trial, we were not permitted to do any discovery. That was the rule because of the secrecy and nature and all kinds of problems that were going on with this secret project. There was a psychiatrist who ran the program. We had been told he was in a hospital in New York in the last few weeks of his life because he was terminally ill. We were also told by very credible sources that he was a good and decent person, a very honest person. So we obtained authority to question him during the trial while he would be on a phone in his hotel room. We never got to take his deposition. And the testimony lasted maybe minutes. And we had made a decision to ask this question. Is it true that during Project MKUltra, when you were at the Aberdeen Proving Grounds, that you as the director of the project yourself were taking LSD on a daily basis? There's a hesitation, and he says, I'm afraid the answer is yes. And that helped us immensely in the case, as you can imagine. So generally, yes, leading questions, especially with experts, and especially with hired gun type experts where that's all they do, because you want to try a little bit more to control what's happening. Fourth, this one is nonsense. Think about that. Never ask a question unless you know the answer when you're cross-examining. Nonsense. Stanley Prizer, Roxanne Conlon, Randy McGinn, so many of the great lawyers historically have taught us this. It should be, never ask a question on cross-examination unless you know the answer or unless you feel you can handle the answer, regardless of what it might be. There are many times in trial where I don't know what the answer will be. Same thing in a deposition. Here's a great question for you. This is more liability oriented, but it's the do-over question. So I got a case, when we get into pain and suffering, we'll talk more about this, but the general manager of a high-end car dealership headbutts somebody. The person goes back, hits his head on the concrete. Andrew, you know about the case. I'm taking the deposition of the headbutter. And of course, we're trying to tie in the dealership. Headbutter, intentional conduct. We're not going to go very far with that. But negligent supervision, negligent hiring, negligent retention, those kind of things, that's where the case is. In his deposition, the question goes like this. I said, when I was a kid, and I would play baseball in the afternoon with other kids, most of these kids just in the area where I was were a little bit older, but they were always good to me. So I would get up to bat, and if I would strike out, somebody yell out, well, give Johnny an extra strike, let him have a do-over. And they'd say, you want an extra strike? Yeah, I want an extra strike. Then I would strike out, okay? All right. But they were nice to me. Sir, I want you to go back with me and assume you get a do-over. You're placed in the same circumstances, but now you know everything that has unfolded since then. What would you do? That's a question you can ask in most of your cases. And it's a catch-22 question. In this instance, he said, in a very arrogant and mean look on his face, if I was presented with the same circumstances and I'm out there, I'd do it again. I sure would. I go, okay. And that was the end of the deposition. That was about maybe 2 hours into it. What if he said, no, I wouldn't do it again because what I did was wrong. Okay, now you have an admission of liability, at least on his part, which he never would do. So think about it. Think about coming up with those kinds of questions. All right. Don't quarrel, you know that. You don't get anywhere when you start getting into a silly fight with a witness. Explaining. I know a lot of lawyers feel the necessity to control things. Okay? So one of these is never lose control of the witness on cross. Don't let them explain things. I have never once in front of a jury said something like this. I want you to try your best to limit the answer to yes or no, and then if you need to explain, I don't ever do that. In fact, I do the opposite. I say, I'm going to ask you a question. You can look at the folks on the jury, you give them whatever answer you want, then I'm going to my next question. Are we good with that? Yeah. And I'm not going to limit you to yes and no. I'm not going to try to do that. That's not why we're here. I want them to know I don't need yes and no answers. I really don't care. So you think about where you are going with this explanation. I'm getting ready in the mid-90s to try a case that the newspaper called it the case of the dueling evangelists. I represented an evangelist who purchased a Christian broadcasting television station. He bought it from another evangelist. And the other evangelist was a monster controller of everything and everybody. So we do our mock trials. I'm working with Dr. Melissa Pygott out of Fort Lauderdale. She's a juropsychologist, tremendous. And after we lose mock trial 1, 2, and 3 at the Holiday Inn in West Palm Beach, and I'm like depressed, I said, well, we're going to be going to trial in a few months. So one thing I want you to be thinking about, Melissa, is how do I control this guy when I cross-examine him? She says this. You can call her up and ask her because we've talked about it over the years. She says, control what? I go, Melissa, control the witness. Why do you want to control Melissa? One thing we're taught on cross is never lose control of the witness. She goes, John Romano, put on your thinking cap. You're claiming he is an out of control, all of these bad things. If you control him, you're proving just the opposite. Let him run. I said, I can't do that. Do it. And she said it almost like that. Do it. I said, whoa. So she says to me, here's what I want you to do at trial. Here's what we do. We go to trial. We're a few days into the trial. By the way, one of their defenses was, because we claim fraud, that because our client said, my wife and I prayed to God, and God told us by the TV station, they claimed during the trial that there could not be justifiable reliance because God told them to buy the TV station. That's what they did. So I've got him on the stand. He's the third or fourth witness. And I'm talking to him about certain meetings. And because Melissa says do this, for the first meeting, we'll call it January 15th of 2 years ago, I say, all right, I've finished all the questions that I'm going to ask you now for the meeting of January 15th of a couple of years ago. If there's anything I left out, anything I missed, anything that you want to cover before we move on, I'd like you to look at the folks on the jury. You tell them. And she said, then I want you to step back physically, 3 steps, hands at your side, never like this in the courtroom, never. Hands at your side, and she said, and let him go. He starts going, and about 3 minutes into it, he looks up at Judge Fine, and he says, Your Honor, could I get that easel and come down there in front of the jury? I'm going, oh, what have I done? And he starts going into something that has nothing to do with anything. Dealing with the trial, the case, talking about some property involving a golf course, and the judge is looking at me. I don't care. This seems to be working. So he finishes, I finish, we go to the next meeting. We'll call it March. We do the same thing. When I then say, look at the jury, you tell them what you want to tell them. Lead defense counsel, excuse me, Your Honor, may we approach the bench? We trot up to the bench. He goes, Judge, I object to this unorthodox method of cross-examination. It's prejudicial to the defense. Judge Fine says, well, I've never seen this kind of a cross before, and I'm not sure where it's heading, but if Mr. Romano wants to ask open-ended questions on cross, he can do that. He said, proceed. Melissa Pygott taught me, the verdict was wonderful, by the way, after losing all the mock trials. I mean, getting crushed in the mock trials. Think about that. Who are you controlling? Why are you controlling? Ninth, I won't give you examples. You all know this. I'm looking around and I see that most everybody in here has been practicing a good while. But when you get a good answer, you're taking the deposition of the defense medical examiner. Let's start with what we agree upon. Do you agree Mary, at the time she saw you, had a herniated disc at such and such a level? Yes. Don't say, in fact, don't you agree it's the worst herniated disc you've ever seen? Because then that doctor is going to say, oh, of course not. In fact, it's only minimally herniated. Actually, I think I'm going to backtrack. It's only a bulging disc. Actually, I'm going to backtrack. The next thing you know, what have I done? I had a wonderful answer. Okay? If it's an expert, don't seek the perfect answer. Sometimes with fact witnesses, you can nudge them along to a better answer. 10th, save certain things. We're going to talk about this in a minute, but please, if there's one point I'm going to make in this first part this morning, cross-examination is not just the first stage of summation. Cross-examination is summation. When you cross-examine, you are summing up to the jury. You are making points. If the judge is over there, the jury is here, and I'm cross-examining a witness who is over in this area, for the most part, I will not even be looking at the witness. You agree that on, whatever it is, I'm looking at that. Why? I'm summing up to the jury. You want to lose a jury fast? Fail to make points. So if you drone on and on and on, and you say, there are 50 points I can make with this witness, you don't want to make 50 points with any witness. Is there?